So as with Pokemon Sword and Shield and their upcoming DLC, Isles of Armor and the Crown Tundra, there will be over 900 Pokemon. Over the course of the last 25 years of the franchise, there have been Pokemon with design influences ranging from real-world animals like the Poliwhirl line and translucent tadpoles to,
Here's a Pokemon that looks like an apple.
Now, I'm a biologist, and although the Pokemon series is home to a plethora of Pokemon with interesting biological backgrounds, to me, one of the most interesting evolutionary lines is the Solosis line. Solosis, Duosion, and Reniculus were introduced in the 5th generation of Pokemon, and are clearly inspired by biological cells, with the Pokédex calling Solosis the cell Pokemon. As well as this, their names in most languages relate to some kind of biological organism or process, with the French names of the Solosis line being Nucleus, Maios, and Symbios, which are in references to the cell's nucleus, the cellular process of meiosis, and symbiosis, the name given to mutually beneficial interactions between two organisms. But how cell-like is the Solosis line, and is it possible there's a real-world equivalent? Now, before we get into this, it's worth mentioning that this is most likely not the developer's idea behind the line's design, but it's a great excuse to talk about cellular biology, so please take this with more than a pinch of salt. When trying to identify a cell, firstly it's important to establish what kind of cell it would be. Cells are broken down into two main groups: eukaryotes, which include all of plant, animal, and fungal cells, and prokaryotes, which include different types of bacteria. Now there are also viruses as well, but they're in their own world, they don't really apply to this. When it comes to Solosis, there are two key features which help us to identify exactly what kind of cell Solosis is. First of all, Solosis' head is a distinct nucleus, which identifies it as eukaryotic, and secondly, and more importantly, is that it's green, which suggests to me the presence of chloroplasts, which means that the cells present are either a fungi, an algae, or a plant cell. Now the nucleus, as you probably remember from middle school biology, is the housing for genetic information within cells, but it's only eukaryotic cells which have a membrane-bound nucleus like this, whereas bacteria and other prokaryotes haven't got a membrane-bound nucleus. Instead, if Solosis and its evolutions were prokaryotic, then its head would look more like a comfate. Prokaryotic DNA normally takes the form of plasmids or loops of genetic information that just sort of float around a cell. The Pokédex entry for Solosis says that because their bodies are enveloped in a special liquids, they're fine in any environment, no matter how severe. Now, this is in reference to the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm's main function in the cell is to support suspended cellular components. This doesn't maintain the structure of the cell, but the cell has its own structural skeleton called the cytoskeleton, which helps to keep the cell's shape for it. This is made up of a network of protein filaments which maintain the structure of the cell. As a plant cell, Solosis is likely to have a surrounding cell wall made up of cellulose sugars. This layer provides a mix of protection and structural strength to the cell, and is comparatively thick, being between 10 and 80 nanometers deep. In between the cytoplasm and the cell wall of the cell is the cell's plasma membrane. This layer is practically transparent due to it being only 10 nanometers thick, and is made up of a number of different molecules. The majority of the plasma membrane consists of a tightly packed phospholipid bilayer. These are molecules that consist of a hydrophilic head on the outside and a hydrophobic tail on the inside. This means that this layer will repel any water that tries to pass through it. This causes a bit of a problem though, because this means that many large or insoluble molecules that are needed for cellular function can't pass through the membrane. This is solved by a variety of integral membrane proteins. Some of them, called channel proteins, allow for insoluble molecules to pass through the membrane barrier. Others, called glycoproteins, act as a structural support, as well as allowing the cell to be recognised by other cells thanks to the unique pattern of oligosaccharides which are present on the cell's surface. As well as these, there are peripheral membrane proteins. These attach to the inner surface of the membrane and have multiple roles within the cell. These roles include maintaining cell structure, as well as facilitating chemical functions as an enzyme. Cholesterol maintains a healthy fluidity of the cell's membrane dependent on temperature, stopping it becoming too solid at lower temperatures or too flexible at higher temperatures. So there we go, looking at Solosis, that is all that we would expect to be present. But if we consider Solosis the simplest version of a cell, Duosion and Reniculus would be more complex versions. As Solosis evolves into Duosion and then Reniculus, you notice new elements being added inside the body. In eukaryotic cells, as well as having a membrane-bound nucleus, there are several other membrane-bound bodies within the cell which have varying functions. These cell organelles are contained in membranes of their own, which are different from the cell membrane in chemical makeup, but serve essentially the same function. Besides the nucleus, there are 6 membrane organelles present in nearly all eukaryotic cells. So let's go from the center and work our way out to the plasma membrane. The organelles closest to the nucleus are the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulums. The endoplasmic reticula are connected to the nucleus and consist of many cisternae, flattened tubes, and sacs. The rough endoplasmic reticulum's main role is to manufacture proteins and enzymes. It's able to do this because it's coated in ribosomes, which are critical to the process of translation. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is different from the rough as it isn't coated in these ribosomes. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum specializes in making carbohydrates and lipids, which are necessary for the construction and repair of cell and organelle membranes. Now, if we go a bit further away from the nucleus, we find a Golgi apparatus. Golgi bodies are similar in structure to the endoplasmic reticula and are responsible for modifying and packing up proteins ready to be transported to their destination. They do this by making packages of proteins and lipids called vesicles. These transport vesicles are like little membranes surrounding whatever they're transporting, also made up of phospholipid bilayers, which allow them to transport these materials both into and out of cells by binding to the cell membranes in processes called endo and exocytosis. There are 2 main organelles which work in tandem for plant cell survival, with the chloroplast being responsible for the formation of sugars by photosynthesis. The chloroplasts are made up of 2 membranes which surround stacks of discs called thylakoids, which are suspended in a liquid called stroma. Now, the mitochondria, which are effectively the cell's battery, might be one of the most interesting organelles with the cell. This is due to there being multiple pieces of evidence to suggest that the mitochondria weren't originally a component of eukaryotic cells. In fact, they have their own circular DNA, which suggests that the mitochondria used to be bacteria which had a symbiotic relationship with the eukaryotes, and over time just became part of them. So as I said, the mitochondria are the cell's power pack. They're able to produce energy by a process called oxidative phosphorylation, which stimulates the production of a chemical called ATP, which provides energy for many cellular processes. So when these sugars and these ATP molecules are produced, they may need to be stored somewhere before they're used. Many plants have storage bubbles called vacuoles. They store sugars produced during photosynthesis, as well as a variety of nutrients, some of which may be waste products which are stored before they're sent out of the cell. These structures also serve a dual purpose by increasing the structural strength of the cell. So there we go, there's a little rundown of the structure of our eukaryotic cell, Solosis. Now, if we were to look for a real-world equivalent of Solosis, you might think it'd be an easy job, especially given that there are over 8.7 million eukaryotic species to choose from. But when we look at the Pokédex, we see that Solosis is 30 centimeters long, which is pretty impressive considering that when we think of cells, we're more likely to think of something microscopic, with the average size of a eukaryotic cell being somewhere between 100 micrometers in diameter, which is just smaller than the human eye can even see. So, we're looking for a eukaryotic, single-cell organism that can be seen without the need for a microscope, with a large number of chloroplasts. This is Valonia ventricosa, otherwise known as sailor's eyeballs. It's one of the world's largest unicellular organisms, with the largest example being 9 centimeters in diameter, below the 30 centimeters stated by the Pokédex, but way above any normal eukaryotes. These algae are found in tidal zones of tropical and subtropical areas, and have been found in varying shades of green, dependent on the amount of chloroplast present in the cell. In Solosis, we see a similar range of colours, with its base form and shiny form, with the base form of Solosis having a light green cytoplasm, whereas the shiny form has a more blue-green cytoplasm, which suggests a lack of chloroplast. The big problem with saying that Valonia ventricosa could be the inspiration for Solosis is that Solosis only has the one nucleus, its head, whereas Valonia ventricosa has a coenocytic structure. This means that there are numerous cytoplasmic domains throughout the cell, and each one has its own nucleus, vacuole, and a large number of chloroplasts which are all linked by cytoplasmic bridges. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker. We could still consider Solosis an incredibly large algae, shown through its size, the presence of a membrane-bound nucleus, and the green coloration of both its base and shiny forms. These are purely physiological similarities, and of course, you're not going to find any algae that can bend spoons with psychic powers, or any that could lay an egg like Solosis does in-game. But at the same time, it's incredible that any kind of single-celled organism can grow to these sizes, even without the whole psychic power aspect. So there we are. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, then please consider liking and subscribing. And if you have any ideas, comment down below on what you'd like to see me cover in the future. It was a lot of fun to make this video, and I'd love to make many more like it.